3 days after my husband and his mistress pushed me out of the company I had built for 30 years, my own children turned against me. "You always loved work more than your family," my daughter said before hanging up. 10 minutes later, my son repeated the exact same words. 4 days after losing my marriage, career, and children, I collapsed alone in my office. At the hospital, a genetic counselor closed the door and whispered, "We found your biological father. His entire estate expires in 9 days. That was when everything changed forever. Thank you for being here with me. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever realized someone you trusted had been manipulating the truth for years? Your perspective matters. Quick note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection, but the message at its core is what I hope stays with you. At 61, standing in the corner of my own gala, I watched my husband of 32 years walk through the door with another woman's hand resting on his arm. Vernon Whitfield, 64 and still commanding any room he entered, moved through the ballroom with Celine Archer beside him. She was 38, a senior associate at Harper & Reed, and she wore a dress I knew cost more than her monthly salary. Her hand curved around Vernon's elbow with the casual intimacy of routine. The Harper & Reed annual gala occupied the largest ballroom at the Dewberry Hotel on East Bay Street. 200 guests, partners, federal judges, shipping executives, clients whose retainers funded the mahogany and marble throughout our offices. I had chosen the carpet beneath my feet. I had selected the caterer serving low country shrimp. I had built this firm from a 3-attorney practice into Charleston's premier maritime law house over 30 years. Vernon caught my eye across the ballroom once, then looked away. A colleague appeared at my shoulder, Margaret something, a junior associate whose name I couldn't access through the static filling my head. "Irene, I'm so sorry," she whispered. That was when I understood. No one in this room was surprised except me. Vernon hadn't stumbled into an affair. He hadn't gotten careless. Every detail had been orchestrated: the entrance, the timing, the witnesses. This was an announcement, public and irrevocable. I scanned the room and saw it confirmed in 200 pairs of eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. They had known. Weeks, months. How long had I been the only person in Charleston's legal community conducting business as usual? While my husband built his exit strategy, I stayed 90 more minutes. I shook hands. I smiled at the appropriate moments. I did not leave early because leaving early would have been another kind of defeat. When I finally walked out at 10:15, Vernon was laughing at something a circuit court judge had said. Celine's hand still rested on his arm. Neither of them watched me go. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a public execution. I had been standing in it for 72 hours when they called the vote. Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, the emergency board meeting convened in the T12 boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Charleston Harbor. Container ships slid past Fort Sumter, carrying freight worth less than what Vernon had spent orchestrating my removal. 7 partners sat around the mahogany table I had commissioned in 1998. Vernon arrived precisely at 9, carrying a leather portfolio I'd given him for our 20th anniversary. He distributed packets to each board member. I received mine last. Inside medical assessments I'd never seen, email chains I'd never written, performance reviews documenting a deteriorating competency I'd apparently hidden for 18 months. The fabrication was meticulous. Dates, signatures, interdepartmental correspondence, all of it plausible enough that challenging any single element would make me look exactly as unstable as the file suggested. "These performance inconsistencies speak for themselves," Vernon said. His voice carried the same measured authority he'd used to close a $15 million Admiralty settlement last spring. "We have a fiduciary duty to act." I could have fought. I could have demanded independent verification, forensic analysis of the email metadata sworn statements from the doctors whose signatures appeared on assessments I'd never authorized. But Vernon had chosen his timing with precision. Every partner in this room had watched him walk into the gala with Celine 3 days earlier. Every partner had seen me stand in the corner alone while my husband made his announcement. The file in front of them simply provided legal scaffolding for a decision they'd already made. The vote was called. 5 hands rose to remove me as managing partner effective immediately. 2 abstained. Prescott Griffin voted last. I had mentored him for 8 years, from a nervous associate who couldn't hold eye contact during depositions to the junior partner sitting 3 seats to my left. 42 years old, Harvard Law, 2 children I'd sent birthday gifts to every year since his daughter was born. I vote to remove Irene Whitfield from managing partner effective immediately, he said. His voice was flat, practiced. He didn't meet my eyes. That was the detail I would remember later in the weeks when I cataloged every failure, every moment I'd misread the architecture of my own life. Not Vernon's betrayal that was arithmetic I'd been solving without knowing it for years. Not the falsified file that was just Vernon doing what Vernon did, building narrative from numbers until the story served his purpose. Prescott's voice, flat and practiced. The vote he'd rehearsed. I thought I chose that mahogany table in 1998. I trained every person voting against me. No one spoke when the gavel fell. Vernon gathered his papers with the efficiency of a man who had planned this sequence months in advance. Prescott studied his hands. The 2 abstentions, Davis and Chen, both senior partners I'd recruited personally, looked at me with something that might have been pity if I'd had any capacity left to register it. I stood. I did not speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't confirm the instability Vernon's file had documented so carefully. I packed my things without saying a word. My laptop, the framed photograph of Florence Hayes, the woman who'd taught me maritime law when I was 23 and hungry. The leather portfolio I'd carried for 20 years, worn soft at the edges from 10,000 client meetings. I looked back at the boardroom one last time. At the carpet I'd chosen, the paint color I'd selected after 3 weeks of deliberation, the mahogany table I'd commissioned when Harper & Reed broke 8 figures in annual revenue for the first time. That was the only mistake I admitted that day. I had chosen every single person sitting in that room. I had hired them, trained them, promoted them, trusted them. I had built the mechanism of my own destruction and then handed Vernon the keys. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound like arithmetic. By 6 o'clock that evening, I had unpacked exactly nothing in the boutique hotel room on King Street. The key card sat on the nightstand. My laptop sat on the desk. The leather portfolio sat on the chair. None of them had moved since I'd carried them in 4 hours earlier. There's a particular kind of quiet that a hotel room has when the person you built a life with has taken everything but left you with a room number and a view of strangers walking to dinner. My phone lit up. Priya, 29 years old, working as an architect in New York. My daughter, who sent me photographs of buildings she admired and called every Sunday at 3. I answered. Mom. Her voice had the flatness of rehearsal. I talked to Dad. I assumed you would, I said. You always put the firm before the family, she said. Each word arrived with surgical precision. You chose that life. You chose work over us. I sat very still. The phrasing was exact. Vernon had deployed that exact sentence in 2013 when I'd missed Priya's graduation dinner because a shipping client's vessel had been detained in Savannah. The argument had lasted 3 days. Vernon had won by repetition. Priya, I can't do this right now, she said. I need space. The call ended. 10 minutes later, Beckett, 25 and already building a private investigations practice in Atlanta. My son, who'd inherited Vernon's mathematical mind and my inability to suffer fools. He called from his office number. Mom, I heard what happened. From your father, I said. Dad was the one who was always there, Beckett said. The phrasing hit like déjà vu made audible. He showed up. He made it to the games, the recitals, the dinners. Where were you? Word for word. Vernon's script from 2013 delivered by our son with the conviction of original thought. I could have fought it. I could have cataloged every soccer game I'd attended, every recital I'd videotaped, every dinner I'd cooked before flying to Baltimore for depositions. But Vernon had spent 10 years planting this narrative, watering it with selective memory and careful omission, and now it had grown roots too deep for one phone call to extract. I understand, I said. I need to go, Beckett said. I have a client meeting. He hung up. I opened my laptop, not to cry, to document. 2 calls, identical phrasing. Vernon hadn't just coached them, he'd scripted them, deployed arguments he'd perfected a decade ago, weaponized our children with language they believed was their own. I want to tell you something about losing your children at 61. It is not the phone calls that empty you. It is recognizing the exact moment someone else's words replaced theirs. I typed the phrases verbatim. Priya's call, 6:14 p.m. duration, 4 minutes. Beckett's call, 6:27 p.m. duration, 3 minutes. I noted the identical structure, the surgical timing, the linguistic fingerprints Vernon had left on every sentence. Then I closed the laptop and stared at King Street until the light changed. 4 days later, I returned to the Harper & Reed building at 11 p.m. on Saturday. Security had already deactivated my keycard, but the night entrance used the old mechanical lock I'd installed in 1999. I still had that key. The T12 corner office was empty. They'd removed everything, the files, the desk lamp, the Charleston Harbor charts I'd framed in 2005, everything except Florence's photograph still sitting on the windowsill where I'd left it Tuesday morning. I crossed the room. My chest felt wrong. Not pain exactly, more like a conversation my body was having without my permission. I picked up the frame. Florence Hayes, 34 years old in the photograph, standing outside the College of Charleston Law Library where she'd taught me that maritime precedent favors those who document thoroughly. The room tilted left. I had time to think this is not metaphorical. Then my knees made contact with carpet I'd selected in 2003, and the frame slid from my hands with a sound like arithmetic failing. Footsteps running. Ma'am, can you hear me? Hands careful weathered turned me onto my back. A face appeared above me, 60 years old, kind eyes, custodial uniform with a name patch I couldn't focus on. "I've got you," he said. "Ambulance is coming, just stay with me." I tried to speak. My mouth shaped words my breath couldn't carry. "Don't talk," he said. "Just breathe. I'm right here." His hand found mine. Not tentative, certain. The grip of someone who'd held people together before. The photograph I managed, on the floor. "I'll get it," he said. "But you stay here with me first." Sirens grew from distant to immediate. Voices flooded the room, paramedics, equipment questions I couldn't answer about medications, and emergency contacts and who to call. "Her name's on the door," someone said. "Irene Whitfield. Used to be managing partner." "Raymond, you found her." "Yeah, she was reaching for that frame when she went down." Raymond. The hand holding mine belonged to someone named Raymond. They transferred me to a gurney. The ceiling tiles passed in sequence. I'd approved that renovation in 2007. Raymond's hand stayed in mine through the elevator, through the lobby, through the September humidity that hit like evidence when they wheeled me into the night. "I'll bring the photograph to the hospital," Raymond said. "I promise." I wanted to tell him thank you. I wanted to tell him I'd worked in that building for 30 years and never learned his name. I wanted to tell him Vernon was supposed to be the one holding my hand, and my children were supposed to be the ones who came, and 200 witnesses to my execution were supposed to constitute some kind of safety net. But morphine arrived before words did, and the ambulance doors closed on the only honest thing that had happened to me in a week, a stranger keeping a promise to someone he'd found on the floor. When I woke in the ER at Roper Street, Francis, the hand holding mine, didn't belong to my husband, my children, or any of the 200 people who'd watched my execution 4 days earlier. It belonged to Raymond Bell, 60 years old night shift janitor, 15 years at Harper & Reed. He smiled gently when my eyes opened. "Welcome back, ma'am," he said. "Your photograph's right here. Didn't even crack the glass." Florence's photograph sat on the bedside table where Raymond had placed it before he left at 3 a.m. The glass hadn't cracked. I'd cracked instead. Dr. Lorraine Webb walked into the recovery room at 8:47 Sunday morning with the directness of a physician who respects patients enough not to soften reality. 54 silver-streaked hair pulled into efficiency reading glasses on a chain she didn't bother to hide. She pulled up a chair and opened my chart without preamble. "Your EKG shows a KCNQ1 gene variant, arrhythmia," she said. "Long QT syndrome. Your heart's electrical system misfires under stress. Saturday night, the stress won." I nodded. The morphine had cleared enough that I could follow the explanation, but not enough that I felt anything about it. "Do you have any family history of cardiac disease?" Dr. Webb asked. "Sudden cardiac death, fainting spells, arrhythmia." The question should have taken 5 seconds to answer. "Unknown," I said. Dr. Webb looked up from the chart. "Unknown." "I was adopted," I said. The words came out flat factual. "My adoptive parents are both deceased. I don't have access to biological family medical history." She studied me for 3 seconds that felt like cross-examination. "How old were you when you were adopted?" "Infant," I said. "The records were sealed. South Carolina, 1962. Dr. Webb made a notation that looked like it mattered. "Long QT has a strong hereditary component. Your biological family likely carries the same variant. I'm referring you to the MUSC Cardiac Genetics Program for comprehensive screening and risk assessment." She slid a referral form across the bedside table. "Standard medical bureaucracy, patient name, diagnosis, code, insurance authorization. A checkbox at the bottom. Patient has unknown biological family history." I signed it. I had no idea which door I had just unlocked. "Standard protocol," Dr. Webb said. "They'll run genetic sequencing, build a risk profile, determine if you need an implantable cardioverter defibrillator. The program director is Dr. Alan Foster. He's excellent." "Thank you," I said. Dr. Webb stood, then paused at the door. "Ms. Whitfield, I reviewed your intake notes. You collapsed alone in an empty office at 11 p.m. on Saturday. That's not typical behavior for someone with your professional profile." "My professional profile changed recently," I said. "I see." She didn't push. "The cardiac genetics appointment is scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. Don't miss it." She left. The referral form sat on the table beside Florence's photograph. "I want to tell you something about the word unknown on a medical form. It is not neutral. It is not blank. It is a 61-year chasm you carried without realizing it had a name." I'd spent 3 decades building legal arguments on precedent and documentation. I'd won admiralty cases by reconstructing vessel histories from customs records and port manifests. I could trace a shipping container's journey from Shenzhen to Savannah with 6 phone calls, but I couldn't answer a simple question about where my heart came from. At 2:30 that afternoon, a nurse I hadn't met yet knocked twice and entered without waiting. Mid-40s efficient movements name badge that read, "Margaret Stone, RN. "Ms. Whitfield, I need to inform you of a HIPAA compliance matter," she said. Her voice had the practiced neutrality of someone delivering news that wasn't hers to judge. "This morning, external parties requested copies of your intake records and diagnostic files. The requests were denied under federal privacy regulations." "Who requested them?" I asked. "Your husband, Vernon Whitfield, and an attorney representing him. They called at 6:42 a.m. requesting a full diagnostic summary and prognosis." I sat up. The heart monitor registered the spike. "What time did you say?" 6:42 a.m., Margaret said. "Before you regained consciousness. We have a notation that Mr. Whitfield also arrived at the hospital at 7:15, but left without entering your room. He was here, briefly. He spoke with the charge nurse, was informed of the HIPAA denial, and departed at 7:28. Margaret set a printed incident log on the table hospital policy documentation of denied access requests. Vernon's name appeared twice, once for the phone request, once for the in-person attempt. Both denied. Both time-stamped before I'd been conscious enough to authorize or deny anything. "Thank you for notifying me," I said. Margaret nodded and left. I picked up the incident log. The timestamps told a story Vernon hadn't intended to document. Collapsed 11:14 p.m. Saturday. Ambulance arrival 11:29 p.m. MUSC admission 12:03 a.m. Sunday. Vernon's phone call requesting records 6:42 a.m. Sunday. 6 hours and 39 minutes from collapse to Vernon making his move. But here's what mattered. No one from the hospital had contacted Vernon yet. The official next of kin notification didn't go out until 9:15 a.m., according to the log. Vernon had called 3 hours before the hospital tried to reach him. Someone had alerted him first. I ran the timeline backward, cataloging who knew. Raymond found me at approximately 11:14 p.m. The paramedics arrived at 11:29. By midnight, I was admitted under my own name, Irene Whitfield Emergency Cardiac Event, no visitors authorized until patient regains consciousness. Hospital staff wouldn't have called Vernon without my consent. Hypo prevented that. Raymond didn't have Vernon's private cell number. I was certain of that because Raymond hadn't known my title until the paramedics said it. So who called Vernon at? I checked the math sometime between midnight and 6 a.m., early enough that he could request records before I woke late enough that admission paperwork had processed. I stared at the ceiling tiles, the same institutional pattern. Every hospital uses the kind of detail you notice when you're solving a problem that matters. Vernon knew I had collapsed before anyone officially notified him. He'd moved immediately to secure my medical records, bringing an attorney for leverage. He'd arrived at the hospital not to check on his wife of 32 years, but to gather documentation. Documentation for what? I picked up Florence's photograph. She'd taught me that maritime law rewards those who document thoroughly, who build cases from timelines and access logs, and the small inconsistencies people leave when they move too quickly. Vernon had moved too quickly. And somewhere in the 6 hours between my collapse and his phone call, someone had given him exactly the information he needed. I had exactly one guess who that someone might be. My guess about who'd called Vernon stayed exactly that, a guess, through 3 days of cardiac monitoring medication adjustments and nurses checking vitals every 4 hours. I had theories. I had timelines. I had no proof. Then Tuesday afternoon at 3:15, an unfamiliar number lit up the hospital room phone. I answered expecting billing or pharmacy. Mom. Beckett's voice warm but strained in a way I couldn't immediately place. I wanted to check in. How are you feeling? Better, I said. They're discharging me tomorrow. That's good. A pause that felt rehearsed. How are you feeling structurally? Any confusion about recent events? Structurally. Not emotionally, not physically, structurally. I'm fine, Beckett, I said. Why are you calling from a number I don't recognize? Work phone, he said quickly. My cell died. Mom, I need to ask, do you remember the board meeting clearly? All the details. The question arrived with clinical precision. Not are you okay? Not what happened. But do you remember clearly? Yes, I said. I remember everything. Everything. He pushed gently the way you'd push someone whose testimony you needed to establish. The sequence of events, the vote, what was said. I sat very still watching the Cooper River through the window. A container ship slid past cargo, stacked in patterns. Someone had calculated for maximum efficiency. Everything about this conversation was calculated too. Beckett, why are you asking? I'm worried about you, he said. The words had warmth, but the delivery had structure. Dad mentioned you've been under a lot of stress. I want to make sure you're tracking things clearly. No gaps in memory, no cognitive deficits. I finished for him. Silence, 3 seconds of it. I didn't say that, Beckett said. No, but you meant it. I kept my voice level the way I'd kept it level through 1,000 depositions. Is this call being recorded? Mom, answer the question. Another pause. Longer. Dad suggested I document our conversation. He's concerned about your health. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from recognizing your child's voice being used as evidence against you, not because they chose cruelty, but because they didn't recognize the script they were reading. Beckett, I said quietly, I had a cardiac event, not a neurological one. My mind is intact. My memory is intact. And this interrogation disguised as filial concern is beneath both of us. It's not, you're 25 years old and already a better lawyer than most people twice your age, which means you know exactly what you're doing, or you're being used by someone who does. I hope for your sake it's the latter. I hung up. The phone didn't ring again. I stared at the ceiling tiles, institutional white water stained at the corners, and added another entry to the timeline I'd been building in my head. Vernon wasn't just gathering medical records. He was constructing a competency case using our son as a witness. They discharged me Wednesday at noon with a pharmacy bag full of beta blockers and instructions to avoid stress. I checked back into the King Street Hotel. The same room, the same view of strangers walking to restaurants I'd never tried. The hospital had sent over one cardboard box from my office, the items Raymond had salvaged. Inside my laptop, the leather portfolio and Florence's framed photograph, wrapped carefully in a blanket someone had requisitioned from supply. I unwrapped it slowly. The frame was old, dark wood, simple lines, the kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. I'd carried it through 4 office moves, 2 renovations, 30 years of partnership. The photograph showed Florence Hayes at 43, standing in front of Charleston Elementary, where she'd taught 2nd grade for 3 decades. She'd passed in 2019 at 78, 3 months before Vernon walked into the gala with Celine. I turned the frame over to check for damage. The backing was loose. No, not loose. Deliberately unsealed at one corner, the kind of careful work you do when you want something found but not immediately. I slid the backing free. A sealed brown envelope, the old-fashioned kind with a clasp, fell onto the hotel bed. Florence's handwriting on the front precise, despite arthritis. "When you are ready." I sat down. I opened it. Inside 3 documents that rewrote the mathematics of my entire life. First, a birth certificate. Original, not amended. Mother Eleanor Collins, age 19, Charleston. Father unknown. Date of birth: April 3, 1962. Place Charleston County Hospital. Second adoption papers dated November 1962. Florence Hayes, age 21, single school teacher. Petition granted by family court. Sealed record, standard procedure for the era. Third, a handwritten note on Florence's stationery dated March 2018, 1 year before she died. "My darling, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you found the truth I should have told you 30 years ago. In 1987, your biological father contacted me. You were 25, building your law career, fierce and brilliant, and entirely convinced you knew who you were. He was a good man, kind, accomplished, genuinely devastated he hadn't known about you. He wanted to meet you. I was terrified of losing you. Terrified that knowing him would change how you saw me, how you saw yourself, how you saw the life we'd built together. So I told him you weren't interested. I lied. He respected that lie. He left his contact information and said, if you ever changed your mind, the door was open. Then he walked away the way decent people do when they believe they're honoring someone's wishes. I kept his letter. It's in my safety deposit box at First Citizens, along with everything I could find about Eleanor, your birth mother, and about him. The bank will release it to you after my death. I thought I was protecting you. I was protecting myself. Forgive me. All my love, Florence." I read it 3 times. In 1987, I was 25 and building my career. Florence received contact from my biological father and hid it. For 31 years, she carried that silence. For 31 years, I existed in a gap I didn't know was there. I folded the note back into the envelope and sat with it for a long time in that sterile hotel room. The biological father who had searched for me in 1987. The adoptive mother who loved me enough to hide it. The husband who was building a case to declare me incompetent. And I suddenly understood unknown on that medical form didn't mean non-existent. It meant deliberately concealed. 5 days after I found Florence's confession, I walked into the MUSC cardiac genetics consultation room, carrying questions I hadn't known how to ask until a medical form demanded answers. Desmond Knox pulled up the regional research database at 9:23 Thursday morning and stopped mid-sentence with his hand frozen on the mouse. "Ms. Whitfield," he said slowly, 46 precise in the way genetic counselors must be when they translate DNA into consequences people can understand. "Before we discuss your children's screening protocol, I need to confirm something." He'd already explained the KCNQ1 variant, the hereditary component, the statistical likelihood that Priya and Beckett carried the same arrhythmia signature that had dropped me in an empty office at 11 p.m. Standard protocol required tracing my biological lineage to assess their risk. "I understand," I said. "I have the adoption paperwork. My biological mother was Eleanor Collins, 19 years old in 1962. Father unknown." "Right." Desmond typed something I couldn't see. "To screen your adult children effectively, we need a lineage trace. The MUSC research database contains genetic profiles from cardiac patients who've consented to research participation. Sometimes we find matches, siblings, parents, extended family who've uploaded their information. You're going to search for my biological family in a medical database, I said. With your consent, yes. It's voluntary, but it significantly improves our risk assessment for Priya and Beckett. I signed the consent form. What began as protecting my children became the doorway to my own past. Desmond ran my profile through the database. The computer processed for 17 seconds. I counted them against the wall clock, the kind with institutional red hands that tick audibly. Then the screen changed. Desmond went very still. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "this database contains a profile uploaded by a man named Walter Townsend in 2017. Your genetic profile matches his at 99.7% paternal probability." The room tilted the way it had before I collapsed. But this time I was sitting down, and this time the morphine couldn't dull what I was hearing. "Walter Townsend," I repeated. Desmond turned the monitor so I could see. A database entry, clinical and precise. Profile ID WT-2017-0342. Upload date, March 15, 2017. Diagnosis, KCNQ1, long QT syndrome. Type 1 age at upload, 77 status deceased, October 2018 codicil. Searching for daughter born. March 1962, Charleston, SC Eleanor Collins, birth mother. Contact Virgil Harrington and Associates, 412, Meeting Street, Charleston. "Do you recognize that name?" Desmond asked. "No," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "I have never heard it in my life. I want to tell you something about the word match appearing on a genetic database screen. It is not clinical. It is not neutral. It is the answer to a question you didn't know had been asked for 61 years. He uploaded this profile 6 years ago," Desmond said. "The codicil is unusual. Most research participants don't include contact information or search parameters. He deliberately structured this entry so that if a genetic match ever appeared in the system, we'd know to reach out to this Virgil Harrington." "He was searching for me," I said. "It appears so, yes." I stared at the screen. Walter Townsend, born 1940, died October 2018, 5 years ago, 9 months before Florence passed, 9 months before she could have told me he'd found a way to leave a trail. Unless Florence hadn't known. Unless Walter had built this breadcrumb without her knowledge using medical science and database architecture to accomplish what a 1987 phone call couldn't. "What was his diagnosis?" I asked. "The same as yours," Desmond said. "KCNQ1 long QT syndrome. He uploaded his profile as part of a regional cardiac study. The codicil was attached as a research note technically outside standard protocol, but the database accepted it. He knew he had the gene variant," I said. "He knew if I ever had cardiac symptoms and got genetically tested, there was a chance I'd end up in this exact database." "That's a reasonable interpretation," Desmond said carefully. "The MUSC Cardiac Genetics Program is one of the largest in the Southeast. If you had a cardiac event anywhere in the Carolinas, there's a high probability you'd end up here." Walter Townsend had played the odds. He'd uploaded his genetic signature, attached a note, and waited for medicine to do what family court records and sealed adoption files couldn't connect us. And it had taken a fraudulent board meeting, a public humiliation, a cardiac collapse, and Florence's posthumous confession to get me into the chair where that connection could happen. "The contact information, I said. Virgil Harrington, is he—" "I can't speak to Mr. Harrington's current status," Desmond said, "but the codicil requests that any genetic match be directed to him. I'm required by the research protocol to honor that request." He wrote the information on a card, Virgil Harrington and Associates, 412 Meeting Street, Charleston, a phone number with a 843 area code. "What was Walter Townsend's occupation?" I asked. "The database doesn't track that," Desmond said. "Just medical history and contact parameters." I took the card. My hand was steady. My heart rate was not the monitor I was still wearing from the previous week's event registered the spike. "For your children's screening," Desmond said gently, "This match gives us a complete paternal lineage. The variant is confirmed hereditary. I'll recommend EKG screening for both Priya and Beckett, genetic testing, and risk assessment. The good news is we caught yours and we can catch theirs before any cardiac events occur." "Thank you," I said. Desmond printed the genetic report, 3 pages of data that translated to "You are the daughter of a man who spent years searching for you, using a medical database as a message in a bottle." I walked out of that consultation room at 10:14 a.m., carrying a phone number, a name I'd never heard, and the understanding that Florence's 1987 silence hadn't ended the search. It had just redirected it into channels she couldn't control. Walter Townsend. I had never heard the name in my life. But in my hotel drawer 2 miles away lay a birth certificate reading "Father Unknown" and Florence's confession note and a husband building a guardianship case and a cardiac event that led me to this exact chair at this exact moment. Walter Townsend had left a contact name Virgil Harrington Meeting Street, and for the first time in 61 years, Unknown had a face attached to it. And according to the codicil on that screen, Walter Townsend had left a contact name Virgil Harrington Meeting Street. I sat in my car in the MUSC parking garage with the engine off, staring at the card Desmond had given me. Virgil Harrington, 412, Meeting Street. A phone number I'd never dialed to reach a man I'd never met about a father I'd never known. I called at 10:17 a.m. Virgil Harrington answered within 2 rings. His voice had the measured authority of someone who'd been waiting by the phone for years. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said. "Not hello, not how can I help you?" "We have been waiting for you for 4 years. 4 years, I repeated. Since Walter passed in October 2018. 67 years old, I would learn later, managing an estate with the precision of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. "I assume you've just come from MUSC Cardiac Genetics. How did you—" "Because that was the only way you'd find me," Virgil said. "Walter designed it that way. The genetic database, the codicil, the contact information. He built a trail that only you could follow, and only if you needed cardiac care. He was playing the long odds." I pressed my palm against the steering wheel, grounding myself in something solid. "Mr. Harrington, I need you to tell me what this is about. The estate is $65 million, he said. No preamble, no softening. Townsend Maritime Holdings, Equity Prime, Charleston Commercial Real Estate Investment Portfolios, and we have exactly 9 days left." The parking garage tilted. I'd learned to recognize that feeling the moment before everything changes. 9 days until what? "Walter's will contained a DNA verification clause," Virgil said. "If his biological daughter could be identified and verified within 5 years of his death, the entire estate passes to her. If not, it dissolves into charitable trusts. October 2018 to October 2023. We are 9 days from the deadline." I did the math automatically the way I'd done arithmetic my entire career. Walter died October 2018. 5 years forward, October 2023. I'd collapsed on a Saturday, been hospitalized, found Florence's letter, undergone genetic testing, and discovered a $65 million inheritance with 9 days remaining before it vanished. "Mrs. Whitfield." Virgil's voice pulled me back. "Can you come to my office today?" "Yes," I said, "when now would be preferable." I didn't go to Virgil's office, not yet. Because sitting in that parking garage with 9 days on a countdown clock, I finally understood the shape of Vernon's orchestration. The gala entrance with Celine, the falsified board documents, the medical records request 6 hours after my collapse, Beckett's recorded interrogation about my cognitive clarity. Vernon had known about the estate. He had to have known. And if he knew every move he'd made for the past year, maybe longer, had been designed to ensure I never claimed it. I'd lost my firm, my husband, and my children in the span of 9 days, and now I had 9 days to claim $65 million from a father I'd never met. I sat in that parking garage and laughed, not from joy, but because there was simply no other response left. Then I dialed a different number, one I hadn't called in 15 years. Celeste Ramsey's office occupied a restored 1901 brownstone on Meeting Street, 3 blocks from where Virgil practiced. I arrived at 7 that evening without an appointment. She answered the door herself. 58 sharp in the way trial attorneys stay sharp long after they stop needing to prove it. We'd faced each other in court 15 years ago over a maritime insurance dispute. I'd won using a statutory loophole she'd missed. She'd never forgiven me. I'd always respected her. "Irene Whitfield," she said. Not a greeting, an observation. "I need an estate attorney who can move fast," I said. "And I think my husband discovered a fortune that belonged to me before I knew it existed." Celeste studied me for 5 seconds. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." Her conference room had the kind of mahogany table you earn over decades of billable hours. I laid out the full puzzle, the genetic database match, Walter Townsend's $65 million estate, the 9-day DNA verification deadline, Vernon's systematic destruction of my professional life, his attempt to access my medical records, Beckett's coached interrogation. Celeste listened without interrupting. When I finished, she picked up her phone and canceled her morning calendar. "I'll take the case," she said. "My retainer?" "Not for the retainer." She leaned back in her chair, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw her smile. 15 years ago, you beat me using a statutory loophole I didn't think was possible. You were brilliant, and I was humiliated. I want to watch you do that again." "You want revenge?" I said. "I want to watch Vernon Whitfield realize he underestimated you the same way I did." Celeste pulled out a legal pad. "Now tell me everything again, and this time I'm taking notes." We worked through the night. By midnight, the conference table was covered in timelines, estate documents Virgil had messengered over DNA verification protocols, and a growing list of Vernon's calculated moves. "If Vernon knew about the estate, he's been planning this for years," Celeste said, highlighting a date. "We need to assume every move he's made has been calculated." "The gala was September 21st, I said. "The board vote was 3 days later. He initiated both within 3 weeks of the estate deadline. He was compressing your options," Celeste said. "Remove your professional credibility, isolate you from your children, establish medical incompetence. If you'd never gone to that genetics appointment, you'd never have found Virgil, and Vernon would have won by default." "The cardiac event," I said slowly, "it wasn't part of Vernon's plan, it was the variable he couldn't control. And it led you straight to the one database that could identify you," Celeste finished. "Walter's breadcrumb worked because Vernon couldn't predict your heart would fail." By 2 o'clock Friday morning, we had a strategy spread across Celeste's conference table. It wasn't flawless, there were gaps, we couldn't close timelines, we couldn't compress risks, we couldn't eliminate. But it was enough to execute. And sometimes enough to execute is all you need. The formal DNA verification would begin at MUSC in 6 hours. At 8:47 Friday morning, 6 hours after leaving Celeste's office, I sat in the MUSC lab facility while a phlebotomist prepped the formal chain of custody blood draw. Virgil Harrington stood 3 feet away with a notarized witness form already signed. Desmond Knox supervised the sample collection with the precision of someone who understood what $65 million in legal liability looked like. The needle entered my vein, the vial filled with blood that would either confirm or dissolve an inheritance from a father I'd never met. "The expedited processing will take 48 hours. Desmond said, labeling the vial with a barcode that would track it through every stage of analysis. "The certification will be legally binding for probate purposes." Virgil photographed the sealed sample, the witness form, the timestamp on the lab equipment. Documentation at every step, the kind of thoroughness Walter Townsend had apparently taught him. "Mrs. Whitfield," Virgil said, as the phlebotomist applied a bandage to my arm. "Regardless of the outcome, I want you to know Walter spent the last 15 years of his life searching for you. He hired investigators, filed requests with family court, petitioned the state to unseal adoption records. Every legal avenue led to a dead end. Until the genetic database," I said, "until the genetic database..." Virgil confirmed. He uploaded his profile in 2017 when he was first diagnosed with the arrhythmia. He told me if she ever needs cardiac care, she'll find me. He was right. I left the lab at 9:23 with a receipt for a blood sample and a 48-hour countdown. The call came Sunday morning at 7:14 a.m. Virgil's voice had the controlled energy of someone delivering news they'd been waiting 5 years to say. 99.7% paternal certainty, he said. The certification is binding. I'm filing the validation petition with the probate court immediately. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed still wearing yesterday's clothes and felt the weight of it settle. How much time did we have left on the deadline? I asked. 6 days, Virgil said. We made it with 6 days to spare. The petition was filed at 9 a.m. Sunday. The estate belonged to me on paper, but I knew Vernon well enough to know this wasn't the end of the line. It was the moment he'd been preparing for. There's a particular weight that comes with claiming $65 million from a man you never met. Not triumph, not relief, but the quiet understanding that the inheritance was never about money. It was about a door he left open for 36 years, hoping I would find it. The text arrived at 10:23 Sunday morning from an unknown number. I need to speak with you, alone. Cafe on Ashley Avenue near MUSC. I'll be there at 11. Please come. Celine. I stared at the message for 30 seconds, then forwarded it to Celeste with a single word, recording. Her response came within a minute. Yes, I'll be in the parking lot. Celine was already seated when I arrived at 10:58. Corner table back to the wall, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. 38 years old and looking 10 years older than she had at the gala 3 weeks ago. The woman who'd walked in on Vernon's arm with perfect confidence now sat with shoulders curved inward, like someone bracing for impact. I sat down across from her without ordering anything. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was quiet, controlled in the way people sound when they're holding themselves together with force of will. "You have 2 minutes," I said. I fell for it because there was no logical reason to doubt a senior partner. She spoke quickly, like she'd rehearsed this. "Vernon showed me medical assessments. He said you'd been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. He said you were hiding it from the firm, that you'd made critical errors in client files, that the partnership was at risk." She slid her phone across the table, an email chain encrypted header visible at the top. From V. Whitfield to S. Archer, date August 12, 2023, subject Irene, medical situation. Irene has been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's per the attached neurological assessment from Dr. Harrison Fletcher at Roper. She is a systemic liability to the partnership. This is not personal. This is fiduciary duty. Attached a PDF that looked exactly like a medical report. Letterhead signatures, diagnostic codes, prognosis. All of it fabricated. I'd never seen Dr. Harrison Fletcher in my life. I believed him, Celine said. I thought I was helping protect the firm. I thought the gala entrance was... She stopped, swallowed hard. I thought it was a public commitment, that he was choosing me. I pushed the phone back across the table. Why are you telling me this now? Celine reached into her bag and pulled out a folded document. She slid it across with hands that were visibly shaking. This is the offshore asset routing sheet Vernon sent to his Cayman proxy on September 28th. She said, 1 week after the gala, look at the recipient list. I unfolded it. Account transfers, shell company, registrations, equity liquidation schedules, standard offshore wealth movement, the kind of architecture Vernon had built careers explaining to clients. The recipient list showed one name, V. Whitfield, via Harrington Trust Services, Grand Cayman. No secondary beneficiary, no joint account holder, no mention of Celine Archer anywhere in the entire document. He used me as a shield, Celine said quietly. The affair, the public entrance, the association, all of it was designed to make me look complicit when the partnership dissolved. And then he planned to vanish without me. She pulled out a third document, another email dated October 1st, from V. Whitfield to S. Archer. The partnership restructuring will require temporary distance. Trust the process. You'll understand when the dust settles. He was setting up the exit, I said. Celine nodded. I didn't understand until I saw the routing sheet. He wasn't taking me with him. He was using me to create reasonable doubt about his motives, then discarding me when I was no longer useful. I looked at this woman 23 years my junior, who had trusted the man I'd shared a bed with for 32 years, and I felt nothing resembling hatred. I felt something closer to exhaustion, an absolute resolve. Vernon hadn't just destroyed me. He had built an entire system designed to destroy anyone who stood between him and $65 million. The question was no longer whether he knew about the estate, it was how long he had known, and what else he had concealed. The answer arrived Sunday afternoon in the form of spreadsheets, wire transfer records, and a forensic accountant who'd spent 20 years hunting financial criminals for the IRS. Conrad Dalton spread 72 hours of asset tracing across Celeste's conference table at 3:30 and delivered his opening line with the calm certainty of someone who had seen every variation of fraud humans could engineer. "Money doesn't disappear," he said. "It just moves." 55 methodical in the way people become when precision determines whether criminals go to prison or walk free. He'd left the IRS 3 years ago to consult privately, and Celeste had called him Friday night with a single question. Can you trace Vernon Whitfield's corporate access over the past decade? Conrad pointed to the first spreadsheet. Over 7 years, 2016 through 2023, Vernon moved $4.2 million from Harper & Reed corporate accounts into a shell company registered in Delaware. The transfers were small enough to avoid automatic flagging, 30,000 here, 50,000 there, structured to look like legitimate vendor payments. Vendor payments to what company? I asked. Archer Consulting Services, LLC. Conrad slid across the Delaware corporate registration. Sole listed director, Celine Archer. Celeste leaned forward. Without her knowledge, without her signature, Conrad said. I compared the registration documents to Celine's known handwriting samples from firm contracts. Different hand entirely. He forged her signature, used her social security number without authorization, and structured the company to make her legally liable for the fraud. Identity theft, I said. Federal identity theft wire fraud and breach of fiduciary duty to the partnership, Conrad confirmed. The interesting detail, Vernon started these transfers in March 2016. Do you know what else happened in 2016? I thought back, 7 years ago. Nothing significant that I recall. Walter Townsend's first cardiac event, Conrad said. Hospital records show he was admitted to MUSC in February 2016 for arrhythmia evaluation. 1 month later, Vernon initiated the first transfer. The timeline snapped into focus. Walter's cardiac event would have triggered genetic testing. Genetic testing would have created a database entry. And somehow Vernon had found it. He's known for 7 years, I said. At minimum, Conrad said. And this is only what I scraped together in 72 hours. There's more. I can guarantee it. I stared at the spreadsheet. $4.2 million, 7 years, structured methodical architectural. He didn't steal this money for operating funds, Celeste said. $4 million wouldn't move the needle for someone planning to claim a $65 million estate. No, I said slowly. He stole it to create evidence, to establish a pattern of corporate malfeasance that could be traced to Celine if needed or buried if not. He was building options. Conrad nodded. The shell company gives him flexibility. If the estate claim succeeded and you were eliminated, the fraud stays hidden. If you fought back and he needed leverage, Celine becomes the fall guy, a junior partner who embezzled millions and seduced a senior partner to cover her tracks. I want to tell you something about discovering the architecture of betrayal. It's not the individual acts that hollow you out. It's recognizing the blueprint was drawn years before the first stone was laid. We worked until 8 p.m., cataloging transfers, tracing shell accounts, documenting Vernon's 7-year construction project. Then Conrad left to continue digging, and I returned to the King Street Hotel with 3 lever arch binders of financial evidence. The encrypted call came at 9:03. Mrs. Whitfield. Prescott Griffin's voice shaking in a way I'd never heard during his 8 years at the firm. I haven't been able to sleep since Tuesday. I need to tell you something. I sat down on the hotel bed, put the phone on speaker, and waited. Vernon threatened me, Prescott said. 5 years ago, I made a regulatory oversight on a shipping insurance filing. Minor correctable, but technically reportable to the Bar Association. Vernon discovered it during a routine file audit. He sat me down in his office and explained very clearly that if I ever voted against his interests, the oversight would be reported, and my career would end before I made senior partner. And the board vote, I said, was the threat cashing in. Prescott finished. He told me the week before Irene goes, or your career does. I was the deciding vote. He knew it. I knew it. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saved every email, Prescott said. Screenshots, metadata, full message threads. Every extortion communication Vernon sent over 5 years. I knew a day would come when I'd need leverage, when the choice would be between my career and something that mattered more. I heard him take a breath that sounded like it hurt. I voted to destroy you, Mrs. Whitfield, and I documented every second of why I did it because I knew Vernon well enough to know he'd eventually ask me to do something I couldn't live with. I just didn't think it would be you. The hotel room was very quiet. Outside King Street carried on with its Sunday evening routines, couples walking to dinner, tourists photographing historic architecture, people living lives where the worst thing that happened this week was a delayed reservation. Prescott, I said carefully, are you prepared to swear to this on the record? A beat of silence. Then his voice steady for the first time in the call. Yes, I think I've been prepared for a long time. I just needed someone to ask. I'm asking, I said. Then I'm saying yes. I'll testify. I'll bring the emails. I'll bring the metadata showing when he sent them, when I received them, when I complied. All of it. I hung up at 9:47. 3 witnesses in 72 hours. Celine with the fabricated Alzheimer's emails and offshore routing sheets. Conrad with 7 years of wire fraud documentation. Prescott with 5 years of extortion evidence preserved like insurance. And Vernon still had no idea what was coming. But Walter Townsend had left more than a genetic breadcrumb. And Saturday morning, Virgil Harrington would open an envelope that rewrote everything I thought I understood about my own life. 3 days later, the deeper plan revealed itself in email metadata and fabricated timestamps. Trevor Blackwell isolated the data at 2:47 Wednesday afternoon in his North Charleston office and delivered the finding without preamble. A digital forensics expert who'd testified in federal court dozens of times, he pulled up the screen with the methodical precision of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. These emails Vernon used to justify your removal were constructed directly from his desktop computer in June 2023, Trevor said. 3 months before your board meeting in September. I leaned closer to the monitor. The metadata was explicit creation dates, modification history file paths, showing the documents had been built from scratch, not received from external sources. He didn't receive these emails, I said. He authored them. Correct, Trevor said. And there's more. He opened a directory tree showing Vernon's document folder structure. Nested 3 layers deep, a file labeled guardianship_petition_draft_v3.docx. Timestamp January 2023, 8 months before my collapse. He drafted a guardianship petition 8 months before you had any medical event, Trevor said quietly. He was preparing to legally neutralize you before you ever fainted. I stared at the timestamp. January 2023. I'd collapsed in late September. Vernon had been building the legal architecture to declare me incompetent while I was still running the firm, still healthy, still unaware my heart carried a genetic variant that would drop me in an empty office 8 months later. Or maybe not unaware, maybe prompted. Can you determine if he researched cardiac conditions or long QT syndrome? I asked. Give me an hour, Trevor said. I drove back to Celeste's office in silence, the guardianship timestamp burned into my vision. 8 months. He had drafted that petition before I ever fainted. He was waiting. And when I didn't collapse on his schedule, he made sure I fell. The call came Friday at 5:17 a.m., Celeste's voice tight with something between fury and exhaustion. Get to my office now. I arrived at 5:43 to find her conference room looking like a war room. Documents covered every surface. Coffee cups accumulated in archaeological layers. Celeste looked like she hadn't slept, which meant she'd been working through the night. Deep in Vernon's personal financial records subpoenaed via expedited corporate discovery, I found search history from 3 years ago, she said. She pulled up a laptop screen. Queries to outside counsel about Townsend Maritime estate terms, DNA verification clauses, 5-year statute limitations, net asset evaluation methodologies. The search queries were time-stamped. 3 years ago, October 2020. He discovered you were Walter Townsend's biological daughter 3 years before you did, Celeste said. While you thought you were maintaining a marriage, he was executing a corporate takeover of your life. I sat down before my legs could decide for me. 3 years. He had known for 3 years, and in that time I had attributed his distance to work stress, his coldness to middle age, his affair to weakness. I had been married to a man executing a long-term financial infiltration, and I had mistaken it for a failing marriage. The affair with Celine started 18 months ago, I said slowly. A year and a half after he discovered the estate. Not coincidence, Celeste confirmed. Strategic deployment. He needed public evidence of infidelity to support the incompetence narrative, a devoted husband reluctantly exposing his wife's decline. Celine wasn't a weakness. She was a prop. The gala entrance, I said. September 21st, 3 weeks before the estate deadline. Final compression of your options, Celeste said. Public humiliation, professional isolation, medical incompetence, claims all deployed in the window when you were most vulnerable and least likely to discover the inheritance. Every erratic piece of behavior from the past 3 years, the affair, the board vote, the medical records request Beckett's coached interrogation, it all made perfect, terrifying sense. There's more, Celeste said quietly. You need to see Conrad. Conrad's office that afternoon looked like the financial crimes division it used to be. Spreadsheets, wire transfers, corporate registrations layered across dual monitors. I went deeper into Walter Townsend's search history for his daughter, Conrad said, without preamble. He hired private investigators in the 90s. Most trails went cold at sealed adoption records. But one firm, Meridian Intelligence, now defunct, reported in 1999 that they'd located Eleanor Collins' daughter, made contact through intermediaries, and received definitive response, daughter refuses all contact, wants no relationship. Florence's 1987 letter, I said. She told Walter's representative I wasn't interested, except the 1999 contact wasn't with Florence, Conrad said. He pulled up a bank record. Meridian Intelligence received a substantial wire transfer in 2002 from an account tied to Vernon Whitfield. Payment memo consultation services confidential. The room went very still. In 2002, you'd been married 11 years, Conrad said quietly. Your children were 4 and 1, and Vernon was already paying investigators to ensure you would never find out who your biological father was. I stared at the wire transfer record. The amount $25,000. The date March 2002. 21 years ago. Priya had been 4. Beckett had been 1. We just bought the house on Trad Street. I'd been made junior partner that spring. Vernon had taken me to Kiowa Island for our anniversary and told me he was proud of the life we'd built together. And he'd been systematically dismantling every path that could lead me to a $65 million inheritance. How did he know? I asked. In 2002, how did Vernon even know Walter Townsend was searching for me? I don't know yet, Conrad said, but I will. Celeste, who'd followed me to Conrad's office, leaned against the wall with her arms crossed. 21 years, she said. This wasn't opportunistic. This was architectural. I stared at the wire transfer record dated 2002. 21 years. We'd been married 11 years. Our children were 4 and 1. And he was already paying detectives to ensure I would never find my biological father. Vernon hadn't just discovered the estate 3 years ago. He had been systematically dismantling every path to it for over 2 decades. And we still didn't know the full extent of what he had built. The full extent arrived Saturday morning in the form of a wax-sealed envelope and a father who'd been watching from a distance I'd never noticed. Virgil Harrington placed it on Celeste's conference table at 9 a.m. and said the words that changed everything I thought I understood about my biological father. Walter stipulated this letter be opened only upon certified DNA verification, Virgil said. He wanted to be certain you would read it. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock sealed with burgundy wax, bearing an impression I couldn't make out. My name written across the front in careful, slanting handwriting, Irene. Not Irene Whitfield, not Mrs. Whitfield, just Irene. I broke the seal. The letter inside was dated March 2018, 7 months before Walter died. My daughter, if you are reading this, it means you found the trail home. The genetic database worked. I am grateful for modern medicine in ways I never imagined I would be. I watched you from afar so many times. At a legal symposium in Charleston in 2009, you delivered the keynote on maritime insurance precedent. I sat in the back of the auditorium and listened to you dismantle opposing counsel's arguments with precision I recognized because I had used the same techniques for 40 years. You were 47. I was 76. I wanted to approach you after to tell you who I was, but I was terrified of shattering the life you had built for yourself. I came to your firm's opening on Broad Street in 2014. You stood on those steps and welcomed 200 guests. Your husband stood beside you. Your children were there, young adults by then proud of their mother. I watched from across the street and understood why Eleanor never told me. You had a family, a career, a life that worked. Who was I to arrive 30 years late and demand a place in it? I am writing this because the arrhythmia diagnosis means I may not have long and there are things you deserve to know. Your mother, Eleanor, was 19 when you were born, terrified and made the decision she thought would give you the best chance. She was brave in ways I didn't understand until much later. I searched for you for decades. I hired investigators, filed petitions, called in every favor I had accumulated in 40 years of trial law. Every path led to sealed records or dead ends. Until 2009, when one investigator found a photograph of you at that symposium and ran facial recognition against the limited information I had about Eleanor. 93% probability match. I started attending your public appearances after that. I never approached because I was terrified of shattering what you'd built. I am so immensely proud of you, and I am sorry I wasn't braver. The estate is yours. The company is yours. The legacy is yours. I built it hoping someday you would claim it. I left the DNA clause because I wanted certainty. Not for me, but for you. So you would know without question that you belong. With all the love a father can offer across 36 years of distance, Walter, I sat in that conference room holding my biological father's handwriting and understood something about inheritance. Walter Townsend left me $65 million. But the real gift was knowing he had watched me build a life and been proud even from a distance. He chose out of love. I looked up. Celeste was watching me with something I'd never seen in 15 years of professional rivalry gentleness. 2009, I said quietly. I was 47 at that symposium. I remember a tall, silver-haired man at the back of the auditorium. He stayed for the entire keynote through the reception after. I had no idea who he was. Now you know what he was thinking, Celeste said. Virgil cleared his throat. There's a second letter. He placed a smaller envelope on the table. The same cream-colored stock, the same burgundy wax seal. But the name typed across the front wasn't mine. It was Vernon Whitfield's. Walter left this specifically for your husband, Virgil said, with explicit instructions that it be served only after your DNA validation was certified and filed with the probate court. You've read it, I said. Virgil nodded. As executor, I was required to. Walter wrote it 2 weeks before he died. He opened the envelope carefully, preserving the seal. Inside was a single card heavy stock, Walter's handwriting across the center. Vernon Whitfield. I know what you did, and I documented every penny. Walter Townsend. I stared at the card. 11 words. No elaboration, no threats, no demands. Just a statement of fact delivered from beyond the grave. Walter was a trial lawyer for 40 years before he became a shipping magnate, Virgil said quietly. He knew how to preserve evidence. He knew how to build a case. And he knew Vernon was interfering with the search as early as 2002. How, why, I asked. I don't know the full extent, Virgil said. But Walter's personal files contain documentation I've turned over to Conrad for analysis. Financial records, correspondence with investigators, notes about interference patterns. Walter didn't just leave you an estate. He left you a prosecution roadmap. Celeste leaned forward. When does this get served to Vernon? Through official channels at the estate validation hearing, Virgil said. 10 days from now, probate court will notify all interested parties, including Vernon as the spouse. This letter will be delivered as part of the formal packet. So Vernon gets 10 days' notice that Walter documented his crimes, I said. Correct, Virgil said. But he won't know what specifically was documented, just that it exists. I picked up the card again. The handwriting was firm, certain, the kind of script you develop after signing 1,000 legal briefs. I know what you did, and I documented every penny. Walter Townsend had been a trial lawyer for 40 years. He'd built a maritime empire worth $65 million, and he'd spent the last 8 years of his life from 2009, when he identified me, until 2018, when he died, watching not just his daughter, but the man who was systematically preventing her from ever finding him. He hadn't just left me an inheritance, he'd left me a weapon. That same afternoon, my son Beckett called from Atlanta with evidence of his own. The evidence arrived in 2 waves, first from my son, then from my husband's desperation. Beckett called at 3:17 Saturday afternoon, 4 hours after Virgil had unsealed Walter's letters. For the first time since the board meeting 3 weeks ago, his voice wasn't reading from a script, it was breaking. "Mom," he said, just that word. Not Mrs. Whitfield, not the formal distance he'd maintained through his coached interrogation call. "Mom, I need to tell you something." I sat down in Celeste's conference room, still holding Walter's letter. "I'm listening," I said. "I've been auditing the family cloud drive," Beckett said. His words came fast, like he'd been holding them for days, and finally found permission to release them. "Dad set it up years ago for shared files, family photos, tax documents, that kind of thing. He forgot to revoke my admin access after everything." "What did you find?" "Email server logs, archived automatically to the cloud. Most of it's mundane corporate correspondence, but there's a thread from August, before the gala, before the board vote. An email Dad sent to someone, a financial proxy, I think. I don't recognize the recipient address." I heard him take a breath that sounded like it hurt. "Read it to me," I said. "Subject line, asset transfer timeline," Beckett said. "Body of email emergency guardianship petition will be filed immediately upon medical event confirmation. Once her assets are legally secured under my name via conservatorship authority, we have no further use for her. She can be moved to an assisted living facility or wherever she chooses. Priority is clean transfer before the 5-year statute expires." The conference room went very quiet. Date sent August 17th. Beckett continued. 6 weeks before you collapsed, 5 weeks before the gala. He was planning all of it. And his voice cracked. "I helped him. I called you and asked those questions about your cognitive clarity because he told me you were sick and we needed documentation for insurance purposes. I recorded the call because he said it would help with your medical coverage." Silence. Then, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I believed the wrong person. I didn't say anything for 3 seconds, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was fighting not to cry for the second time in a single day." "Beckett," I said finally, "can you send me that email thread? All of it with full headers and metadata." "Already did. Sent it to the address Aunt Celeste gave me when she called yesterday. She said you might need evidence. I didn't understand until I found this." Celeste had called him. Beckett had been quietly digging, and my 25-year-old son had just handed me documentation of premeditated conspiracy in his father's own words. "Thank you," I said. "I should have called sooner," Beckett said. "I should have questioned the script he gave me. I should have—" "You're calling now," I said. That's what matters. When I hung up at 3:34, Celeste was already pulling up the email thread on her laptop. Your son just gave us motive, timeline, and confession in a single forwarded message, she said. Vernon documented his entire plan in corporate email. He always did, I said. He believes documentation protects him. It never occurred to him it could also indict him. The second wave arrived Sunday morning at 7:45 a.m. I was still at the King Street Hotel. I'd stopped calling it temporary after the first week when the automated notification hit my laptop. Charleston Family Court Electronic Filing System, new petition filed in the matter of Vernon Whitfield versus Irene Whitfield Emergency Adult Guardianship. I opened the PDF, 15 pages, exhibits attached. Vernon's signature at the bottom notarized the previous evening. The petition sought complete legal authority over me due to alleged profound psychological instability following recent professional failures. Attached exhibits included my hospital intake records obtained how I didn't know yet intercepted phone recordings and carefully edited email chains designed to show erratic behavior. I read through the standard legal language. Ward demonstrates incapacity, petitioner has standing. As spouse, emergency circumstances require immediate appointment without full hearing. Then I reached page 4. The ward demonstrates profound psychological instability following recent professional failures, rendering her incapable of managing complex financial assets, including but not limited to the $65 million Townsend Maritime Holdings estate, currently pending probate validation in the matter of estate of Walter Townsend, deceased, probate case number 2023-ES-4471. I read it again. He had listed the estate by name, by value, by probate case number. Vernon had just legally admitted in a filed court document that he knew about the inheritance. He'd enumerated the exact asset value, referenced the probate status, and claimed I lacked capacity to manage it. The entire guardianship petition was structured around assets he allegedly needed to protect me from mismanaging assets he should have had no knowledge of unless he'd been researching my biological family's wealth for years. I called Celeste. She answered on the first ring. I'm reading it now, page 4. He signed his own indictment, I said. He exposed prior knowledge, motive, and intent in a single filing, Celeste said. This is the kind of mistake desperate people make when they're running out of time. The probate validation hearing is 9 days away. He knows if you claim that estate, his guardianship case becomes moot. You'll have resources to fight him indefinitely. So he's compressing his timeline, filing emergency petitions, hoping a family court judge will grant temporary authority before probate resolves. Will they? Not after they read his own admission that he's seeking guardianship over a $65 million estate he shouldn't know exists, Celeste said. Vernon just told the court exactly why he's doing this, and it's not to protect his vulnerable wife, it's to control her money. I stared at page 4 on my laptop screen. The $65 million Townsend Maritime Holdings estate, listed in black ink, notarized signature below, filed with the court at 11:47 p.m. Saturday night. Vernon had been so focused on moving fast that he'd forgotten to move carefully. By Sunday afternoon, we would be deconstructing exactly how badly he had miscalculated. By Sunday afternoon, the full scope of Vernon's miscalculations spread across Celeste's conference table in the form of South Carolina guardianship statutes and a petition he should never have filed. Celeste laid out Vernon's 15 pages beside the relevant case law at 2 p.m. and asked the question that would define our counter strategy. Do you want to play defense or offense? I looked at the petition. Page 4 still glowed with Vernon's catastrophic admission about the estate. Both, I said, simultaneously. Good. Celeste pulled up the statute on her laptop. South Carolina Code Section 62-5-303 requires clear and convincing evidence of total cognitive incompetence for involuntary adult guardianship, not partial incompetence, not temporary instability, total. And it must be backed by independent medical evaluations from 2 unaffiliated physicians. Conrad, who'd arrived 30 minutes earlier with fresh financial records, tapped the petition's medical exhibits. Vernon's sole medical expert is Dr. Marcus Jennings, Conrad said. Your family physician for 20 years. The same Dr. Jennings who shares a private LLC with Vernon Coastal Medical Properties, registered 2008. They co-own a medical office building in Mount Pleasant. I pulled the corporate filings this morning. I stared at the exhibit. Dr. Jennings' letterhead diagnostic assessment recommendation for guardianship. The same doctor who'd treated my family for 2 decades, who'd prescribed my cardiac medications, who'd signed off on Vernon's fabricated incompetence narrative. 15 years of financial partnership, I said. That destroys independent medical evaluation. Completely, Celeste confirmed. Any competent family court judge will dismiss this petition the moment we file a conflict of interest challenge. Vernon needed 2 independent physicians. He provided 1 compromised business partner. She leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since this started, I saw her smile. He underestimated the probate judge, Celeste said. And he catastrophically underestimated you. I didn't respond immediately. I was too busy cataloging every tactical error Vernon had made in the past 72 hours, and there were more than I could count on both hands. The page 4 admission, the single compromised medical expert, the emergency filing that exposed desperation instead of demonstrating competence. Vernon had spent 3 years planning, and in 72 hours of execution, he demolished his own case. When's the guardianship hearing? I asked. Scheduled for next Friday, Celeste said. 8 days from now. We'll file our opposition Wednesday, giving the court 48 hours to review before oral arguments. And the probate validation hearing the following Monday, Virgil said from the doorway. I hadn't heard him arrive. 17 days total until the estate transfers. Vernon's trying to get guardianship authority before probate resolves, but the timelines are working against him. Good, I said. Let them work against him. We spent the next 4 hours building the opposition brief. By 6 p.m., we had a 32-page filing that methodically dismantled every element of Vernon's petition. The compromised medical expert, the lack of independent evaluation, the suspicious timing relative to the estate deadline, the page 4 admission proving financial motive rather than protective concern. It was surgical. It was comprehensive. It was exactly the kind of brief I'd been writing for 30 years. 3 days later, Wednesday at 11:33 p.m., my phone rang. Priya, calling from New York. I answered. Mom. Her voice was shaking. Not angry shaking, grief shaking. Mom, I need to tell you something. I sat up in the hotel bed, fully awake. I'm listening. Dad's secretary resigned yesterday afternoon, Priya said. The words came fast, pressured. Adrienne Spencer. She worked for him for 12 years. She sent me an encrypted email tonight. Mom, she has everything. Everything meaning what? Meeting logs. 12 years of them. Private calendar entries about conversations with financial proxies, offshore routing confirmations, email deletion trails. She said she watched him arrange it all from the beginning, not just the past 3 years, but going back over a decade. She stayed silent because she was terrified he'd destroy her career the way he destroyed yours. But she kept copies of everything because she knew he would eventually turn on her, too. I heard Priya take a breath that sounded like drowning. She said when he filed the guardianship petition, she realized he was capable of anything. So she resigned and reached out to me because... Priya's voice broke. Because she said any daughter deserves to know the truth about what her father really is. Silence on the line. Then, Mom, I'm so sorry. I believed him when he said you were sick. I believed him when he said you were unstable. I believed him when he said the firm was protecting itself from your mistakes. And the whole time, you were the only person in the entire situation telling the truth. Her voice dissolved into weeping. I sat in the darkness of that temporary hotel room and simply let her empty her lungs. I didn't offer empty reassurances or interrupt with legal strategy or explain what Adrienne's files would mean in court. Sometimes people just need to bleed out the lies without being interrupted, and sometimes a mother just needs to listen. Priya cried for 3 minutes, then silence, then breathing that was trying to stabilize. Are you still there? She asked. I'm still here, I said. Adrienne sent everything to an encrypted server. She said Celeste Ramsey would know how to access it securely. She said she'd testify if needed, but she's leaving Charleston either way. She can't stay in the same city as Dad anymore. I understand, I said. Mom, Priya said. Just that word. The same way Beckett had said it 4 days earlier. I love you. I should have said that first. Before any of the evidence, before any of the apologies. I love you. I closed my eyes. I love you too, I said. When I hung up at 11:52, I sat in the dark for a long time. Both of my children had called me Mom in the span of 4 days. Both had apologized for believing Vernon's curated reality. Both had brought me evidence. And Vernon's secretary of 12 years had just handed us documentation that would corroborate everything Conrad had found, everything Celine had revealed, everything the financial records suggested. The next morning, we would formalize Celine Archer as our core witness and confront the ethical crossroad of using her testimony. Thursday morning, I sat across from Celine Archer in Celeste's office and asked her to make a choice that would end her legal career in Charleston before it had properly begun. You realize that if you sign this affidavit, your legal career in this circuit is effectively over, I said. Not temporarily damaged, not recoverable with time. The Charleston legal community will always define you by this scandal, the senior associate who had an affair with a partner whose name appears on fraudulent corporate documents, who became the face of identity theft and wire fraud regardless of your actual culpability. Celine sat very still, 38 years old, smart enough to have made senior associate at a premier maritime firm, and staring at the affidavit Celeste had drafted overnight. Every firm in this circuit will see your name attached to Vernon's case, I continued. Every background check, every bar association inquiry, every professional reference call. You'll be defined by the worst thing that happened to you, not the work you've actually done. I know, Celine said quietly. Do you... I leaned forward. Because I need you to genuinely understand what you're signing. This isn't dramatic exaggeration. This is the reality of how professional communities work. You testify against Vernon Whitfield, and Charleston's legal establishment will remember you as the mistress who brought down a senior partner, not as the attorney who exposed fraud. Celine looked out the window. King Street traffic moved past below people walking to jobs and meetings and lives that weren't being dismantled in real time. 5 seconds of silence. Then she turned back to me. I know, she said again. But if I stay silent, he will do this to the next woman down the line, and the woman after that, and the one after that. Vernon doesn't stop because someone asks nicely. He stops when he's forced to stop. She picked up the pen. Where do I sign? I reached across the table and shook Celine Archer's hand. 32 years ago, I never could have imagined shaking hands with my husband's mistress. But 32 years ago, I hadn't imagined a great many things. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, Celine said. I'm doing this for the next one. Not for you, not for me. For whoever he targets when we're both gone. Celeste witnessed the signature at 9:47 a.m. By 10, the affidavit was filed with the family court as Exhibit C in our opposition to Vernon's guardianship petition. Before I tell you how we activated the federal strike that would freeze Vernon's account 6 hours before the hearing, are you still here? Comment A, if you think Vernon will discover it in time, or B, if he walks in blind. Add your reason in 5 to 10 words. Please note what follows includes some recreated tactical details for narrative impact, but the legal strategy is real. That afternoon at 2:30, Conrad delivered the tactical strike blueprint in his financial investigation office. Using the verified evidence of interstate wire fraud and identity theft, Conrad said, pulling up a federal case file on his monitor, I've officially bypassed local authorities and escalated the complete evidence package to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He clicked through a series of official correspondence, each bearing federal letterhead. The U.S. Cayman Tax Information Exchange Agreement gives federal prosecutors moving authority to freeze offshore accounts when there's documented evidence of tax evasion wire fraud or money laundering. Conrad continued. Vernon's shell corporations, the Delaware, routing the Cayman accounts, all of it qualifies. How long until they act? Celeste asked. They already have, Conrad said. Authorization came through this morning. The freeze executes automatically at a pre-programmed timestamp. I leaned forward. What timestamp? 6 hours before your guardianship hearing begins, Conrad said. He was smiling in a way I'd never seen before, the expression of someone who'd spent 20 years hunting financial criminals and finally caught one who deserved it. Friday morning, 3 a.m., Vernon's Cayman accounts will freeze. Every shell corporation will be flagged. Every offshore routing will be blocked. And notification? I asked. 0, Conrad said. That's the beauty of the tax exchange agreement. When the IRS freezes foreign accounts under criminal investigation, they're not required to notify the account holder until after the action completes. Vernon gets no phone call, no email, no warning. He'll step into that courtroom at 9 a.m., having no idea his exit strategy evaporated 6 hours earlier. Celeste was taking notes, but I saw her smile. Can we ensure he doesn't check his accounts before the hearing? I asked. He can check all he wants, Conrad said, but Cayman banks don't provide real-time freeze notifications to account holders under criminal investigation. The accounts will show normal balances when he logs in. He won't discover the freeze until he attempts a transaction, and by then he'll be standing in a courtroom with a judge reading our opposition brief. I sat back in the chair processing the architecture of what Conrad had built. So Vernon walks into court thinking he has millions in offshore reserves, I said slowly. He thinks if the guardianship petition fails, he can liquidate and disappear. He thinks he has options. Correct, Conrad said. And approximately 6 hours after the freeze executes, he'll step out of that courthouse regardless of the ruling, look down at his phone when the bank notifications finally arrive, and realize there is no corner of the earth left to run to. Every path Vernon had built over 21 years, every offshore account, every shell corporation, every carefully constructed exit strategy, Conrad and the IRS had systematically closed them all. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m., 36 hours from now. There's one more element, Celeste said. She pulled out a different file. Walter Townsend's letter to Vernon, the one Virgil is required to serve through official channels. It gets delivered as part of the court notification packet tomorrow afternoon. Vernon will receive it at approximately 5 p.m., 16 hours before the hearing. 16 hours to read I Know What You Did, and I documented every penny, I said. 16 hours to panic, Celeste corrected. 16 hours to make mistakes. 16 hours to realize that Walter Townsend spent the last 8 years of his life not just watching his daughter, but documenting the man who prevented her from ever finding him. I looked at the timeline Conrad had built. The freeze at 3 a.m., Walter's letter arriving at 5 p.m. Thursday, the hearing at 9 a.m. Friday. Vernon was walking into a trap that had been constructed by a forensic accountant, a federal agency, and a dead man who'd left evidence from beyond the grave. The night before the hearing, I would sit across from Celeste one final time and run the trial strategy until 2 a.m. We sat across from each other until the building's cleaning crew arrived and left running the trial strategy until every contingency had been mapped, every witness sequenced, every piece of evidence indexed. Celeste asked me the question at 11 o'clock under the last desk lamp still burning in her conference room. What if the judge leans toward Vernon's medical documentation at the start? I looked at the opposition brief we'd filed Wednesday, 32 pages, dismantling every element of his petition. The compromised medical expert, the page 4 admission, the timeline proving motive. I have won far worse cases with far thinner evidence, I said. The only distinction here is that the defendant is the man I woke up next to for 3 decades. That doesn't alter my mechanics. It only alters my intent. Celeste studied me for a moment. Your intent being to ensure he never does this to anyone else, I said. Not revenge, not vindication, just permanent removal of his capacity to destroy people. She nodded. That's the right intent. We worked until midnight, then past it. At some point, Celeste pulled a photograph from her desk drawer, yellowed at the edges, dated 1995. Two women in their 30s standing in front of a building on Broad Street, a hand-painted sign reading, Harper and Reed Maritime Law. Two cheap desks visible through the window behind them. Both women smiling with the absolute conviction that they were building something that would outlast them. "I found this last week," Celeste said. "Thought you might want it." 28 years ago. We'd been 33 newly credentialed, utterly certain that competence and hard work would protect us from the world's uglier mathematics. "Keep it," Celeste said. "Tomorrow, when you walk into that courtroom, I want you to remember that woman. The one who believed she could build something permanent." I left at 12:17 a.m. On the drive back, I passed the Harper and Reed building on Broad Street. The lights were out, but the firm logo remained illuminated against the Charleston skyline. I didn't brake, but I watched it in the rearview mirror until the next corner took it from view. Tuesday morning at 8:45 a.m., I walked into Charleston Family Court, dark oak paneling, tall arched windows pouring natural light across marble floors, worn smooth by a century of footsteps. Courtroom 3B, Judge Norma Lancaster presiding. I took my seat at the respondents' table at 8:52. Celeste sat to my left. Celine Archer sat to my right, hands folded on the table, with the composure of someone who'd made peace with what was coming. Vernon entered at 8:58, 64 years old silver at the Temple's expensive suit, tailored to Project Authority without ostentation. His eyes swept the room the way they always did, assessing, calculating, determining who mattered. Then he looked toward the opposing table. His eyes locked onto Selene. For the first time in 32 years, I watched Vernon Whitfield's step falter. Not stumble, not stop. Just the smallest break in rhythm, a half-second pause, invisible to anyone who hadn't watched this man walk into 1,000 rooms over 3 decades. He stared at Selene. Then his eyes shifted to me, then to Celeste, then to the bench. I watched him run the equations, the testimony Selene would give, the shell corporations registered in her stolen name. The offshore accounts he didn't yet know were frozen. The math that had always worked for Vernon suddenly didn't add up. Judge Lancaster entered at 9 a.m. exactly. She took the bench and bypassed every pleasantry. Matter of Vernon Whitfield versus Irene Whitfield. Emergency petition for adult guardianship. This is not a simple competency hearing. This is a contested proceeding with substantial financial implications. Celeste stood. "Your Honor, the respondent calls Conrad Dalton, forensic accountant." I kept my eyes on Vernon, still staring at Selene, still trying to understand how the woman he'd used as a shield had become the weapon pointed directly at him. And for the first time in 32 years, I saw the math fail him. Conrad Dalton stepped down from the witness stand at 9:14 a.m. after 47 minutes of methodical testimony about shell corporations and wire fraud. The courtroom had absorbed his evidence in silence. Vernon's face remained neutral, but I'd watched his hands grip the table edge twice. Then Celeste stood, tablet glowing in her hands, and I watched 32 years of gaslighting collapse into 3 PowerPoint slides. "Your Honor," Celeste said, "I'd like to present digital forensic evidence that directly contradicts the petitioner's claims of protective concern." Judge Lancaster nodded. "Proceed." The first slide appeared on the courtroom monitor, an email chain metadata visible in the header. These are emails the petitioner submitted as evidence of the respondent's deteriorating capacity, Celeste said. Digital forensics analysis reveals they were constructed directly from Mr. Whitfield's desktop computer in June 2023, 3 months before the alleged incidents they purport to document. The metadata shows creation dates, modification history, and IP addresses all originating from the petitioner's home office, not from external sources. Adrienne Hale, Vernon's attorney, stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Chain of custody on this analysis was established through court-ordered discovery." Celeste interrupted smoothly. "Trevor Blackwell, the forensic analyst, is available for cross-examination if counsel wishes." Judge Lancaster looked at Adrienne. "Objection overruled. Continue." The second slide, Delaware corporate registration documents, wire transfer records, account statements. Over 7 years, the petitioner systematically transferred $4.2 million from Townsend Maritime Holdings into a Delaware shell corporation registered under the name Archer Consulting Services. Celeste said, "The sole listed director, Celine Archer, whose signature was forged without her knowledge or consent. Ms. Archer will testify she never authorized this company, never received any proceeds, and only discovered its existence when federal investigators contacted her last month." I glanced at Vernon. His jaw was tight, but he maintained eye contact with the judge, still calculating, still believing he could recover. Then Celeste advanced to the third slide. "This is a guardianship petition draft found in the petitioner's personal files," she said. "Timestamp February 2021, 8 months before the respondent's cardiac event in October 2021. The courtroom went very still. The petitioner drafted legal documents to declare his wife incompetent 8 months before she experienced any medical crisis." Celeste continued, "This wasn't reactive protection. This was premeditated conspiracy to seize control of her legal and financial autonomy before she could claim the Townsend estate. I'd spent 2 years rebuilding neural pathways to sign my own name, and here was the proof he'd planned to erase me while I could still write in cursive. Your Honor." Celeste said, "I call Prescott Griffin to the stand." Prescott had changed his surname back to Griffin, I noted, perhaps distancing himself from the Aldridge name I'd known him by at the firm. He took the oath with hands that shook slightly. "Mr. Griffin," Celeste said, "you were employed at Harper & Reed during the time period in question." "Yes," Prescott said, "junior partner 2018 through present." "Did Vernon Whitfield ever ask you to backdate legal documents?" Prescott met my eyes briefly, then looked at the judge. "Yes, multiple times over 5 years. He provided me with templates and specific dates to use. He said it was standard practice for corporate filings, but I knew it wasn't. He threatened to report a minor regulatory oversight I'd made unless I complied." Adrienne Hale stood again. "Your Honor, this witness is testifying under duress. Duress ended the moment I resigned from the firm last week," Prescott said quietly. "I'm testifying voluntarily." Judge Lancaster made a note. "Objection overruled." Celeste thanked Prescott and turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, there's one more piece of evidence." She pressed play on an audio file. 47 seconds. Vernon's voice, flat and administrative, captured by MUSC hospital security cameras in October 2021. She served her purpose. No further use for her at this point. I've already drafted the assisted living paperwork. Once the estate situation resolves, we can proceed with placement. Another voicemail inaudible response. Vernon again. "The health crisis provides perfect timing. Cognitive decline, narrative, medical documentation, family concern, all of it positions cleanly for guardianship authority." The acoustics in courtroom 3B were designed for testimony clarity, which meant Vernon's recorded voice flat administrative discussing my disposal like quarterly earnings reached every corner. I watched Vernon's face. The neutral expression finally cracked. Not dramatically. Just a tightening around the eyes, a slight shift in posture. "Your Honor." Celeste said, "This recording was captured by hospital security on October 17, 2021, 3 days after the respondent's cardiac event. The conversation took place in a 4th-floor corridor outside the ICU. Chain of custody," Judge Lancaster asked. "Obtained through subpoena of hospital security archives," Celeste said. "But there's corroborating evidence." She called my son to the stand. Beckett Whitfield walked to the witness box with the controlled composure he'd inherited from me. 25 years old private investigator, my son, who'd spent 2 years quietly gathering evidence against his own father. "Mr. Whitfield." Celeste said, "Were you present at MUSC Hospital on October 17, 2021? "Yes," Beckett said. "I was conducting surveillance of my father as part of an investigation into his financial activities. I was wearing a body camera." "Did you capture audio of the conversation we just heard?" "Yes, identical 47-second recording from a different angle. I can provide the raw footage with metadata showing continuous recording, no edits." dual source authentication, hospital security, and body camera. 2 independent recordings of Vernon discussing my disposal while I was unconscious 3 floors above him. Adrian Hale didn't even attempt an objection. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that follows irrefutable evidence. Judge Lancaster reviewed the audio transcript for 4 seconds that felt like 4 hours. Then she raised her eyes from the page, looked directly at Vernon, and I knew he had just heard his own voice end his freedom. Judge Lancaster set down the audio transcript and looked directly at Vernon. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them against the courtroom clock. Then she spoke. "Mr. Whitfield, did you have advance knowledge of your wife's father's estate provisions before October 2021? The question hung in the air like a subpoena. Direct, unavoidable, carrying the weight of everything we just presented. Vernon opened his mouth, closed it. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently. 4 more seconds. "Your Honor," Adrian Hale said, standing, "my client invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." The courtroom absorbed that statement the way it had absorbed the audio recording in profound, damning silence. Judge Lancaster made a note. When she looked up, her expression carried the precise neutrality of someone who'd just watched a case resolve itself. "The Fifth Amendment is Mr. Whitfield's constitutional right," she said. "However, in civil proceedings, the court may draw adverse inferences from a party's refusal to testify on matters directly relevant to the case at hand." She closed the file. "This court finds the petitioner has failed to meet the clear and convincing evidence standard required for involuntary adult guardianship under South Carolina Code Section 62-5-303. The medical evaluation provided shows clear conflict of interest. The timing of this petition, filed within weeks of a substantial inheritance claim, demonstrates financial motive rather than protective concern. And the evidence presented by the respondent establishes a pattern of fraud, identity theft, and premeditated conspiracy spanning multiple years." Judge Lancaster looked at Vernon again. "Petition denied with prejudice. The petitioner is barred from refiling any guardianship action against the respondent. Court clerk will forward the complete record, including audio evidence and forensic analysis, to the U.S. Attorney's Office within 24 hours for criminal investigation." She struck the gavel once. "We are adjourned." I'd spent 2 years relearning how to hold a pen. Watching Vernon invoke the right to remain silent felt like symmetry the universe owed me. The courtroom emptied slowly. Vernon's attorney gathered files with the mechanical efficiency of someone already calculating billable hours for the criminal defense that would follow. Vernon sat motionless at the petitioner's table, staring at nothing. Celeste touched my arm. "Let's go." We walked out at 10:51 a.m. into November sunlight that felt wrong for the moment. Too bright, too warm, too ordinary for what had just collapsed inside courtroom 3B. The courthouse steps were granite worn smooth by a century of footsteps. Celeste and I stopped halfway down. She turned to face me, and for the first time since this started, I saw her smile without calculation behind it. "The Cayman freeze executed at 3:47 a.m., she said quietly. 6 hours before he walked into court. He never saw it coming," I said. "That was the point." She reached out and shook my hand. Not a victory celebration, not dramatics, just a firm professional handshake between 2 attorneys who'd built a case and won. Charleston humidity made the granite steps slick, but Celeste's handshake was dry, calibrated engineer's precision applied to human closure. "What happens next?" I asked. U.S. Attorney opens a criminal investigation. Grand jury convenes. Vernon's assets remain frozen pending the outcome. The estate validation hearing proceeds Monday as scheduled. You'll claim the inheritance, and Vernon won't be able to touch it. And the firm? Conrad found enough evidence of corporate fraud to trigger a full partnership audit, Celeste said. The board will vote to remove Vernon within the week. Whether they ask you back is a different question. "I don't want to go back," I said. Celeste nodded. "I thought you might say that." Behind us, the courthouse doors opened. Vernon emerged with Adrian Hale both moving quickly toward the street. Then Vernon's phone vibrated. He pulled it from his pocket, looked at the screen, and stopped walking. I watched his face change. Not dramatically, Vernon had spent 64 years perfecting control, but enough. The slight widening of eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his thumb moved across the screen checking something twice, then a third time. Grand Cayman banking alert. Accounts frozen. Transaction authority revoked. Effective 3:47 a.m., 6 hours before the hearing. Every exit strategy he'd built over 21 years, every offshore account, every shell corporation, every carefully constructed escape route, all of it closed, while he slept, believing he still had options. Vernon looked up from his phone. His eyes found mine across 20 feet of Broad Street Plaza. Not the calculation I'd seen for 32 years, not the mathematical assessment of leverage and advantage, just recognition. Two people who'd shared a house, a bed, a last name, 2 children, 3 decades of accumulated history, and exactly nothing that mattered. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I didn't offer any gesture that could be misread as reconciliation or triumph. I just looked back. For the first time since 1991, I was looking at Vernon Whitfield, and he was actually seeing me. Not the wife he could manipulate. Not the obstacle he could remove, not the asset he could control. Just me. He held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the parking garage, Adrian Hale following 2 steps behind both of them, moving like people who'd just discovered the ground wasn't as solid as they'd believed. Celeste watched them go. How do you feel? I thought about that question. About the gala entrance 6 weeks ago. About the board vote. About collapsing in an empty office, about genetic databases and cardiac events, and a father who'd left breadcrumbs in medical research, hoping I'd find them, about 32 years of marriage that had been a 21-year con. I feel, I said slowly, like I just finished solving an equation I didn't know I'd been working on my entire adult life. And the answer, I said, is that some problems don't get solved. They just get survived. Celeste nodded. That's the right answer. We walked down the courthouse steps together. Behind us, Vernon disappeared into the parking garage. Ahead of us, Charleston moved through its Tuesday morning routines, unaware that a 64-year-old CFO had just lost everything he'd spent 2 decades stealing. But the U.S. Attorney's Office had already begun pulling thread that would unravel more than Vernon's freedom. Priya stood beside an idling taxi in the courthouse parking lot, her carry-on at her feet, and I realized she'd flown in from New York without telling anyone. The January wind caught her hair. She'd cut it short since Thanksgiving 2022, 14 months that felt like crossing continental shelves. She wore the charcoal coat I'd sent for her 27th birthday, the one she'd never acknowledged receiving. I took the red eye, she said, her voice carrying the exhaustion that comes from crying at 37,000 feet. Beckett sent me the address. I didn't tell him I was coming. The taxi pulled away, leaving us 20 feet apart in a parking lot that smelled like road salt and diesel. Behind us, the courthouse steps where Vernon had received his account freeze notification were empty now. I'm sorry. Priya said the words flat and rehearsed. I believed his version of you for 28 years. Beckett figured it out at 19. I'm 29 and I only started questioning 3 weeks ago. She took 2 steps closer. I could see the red-rimmed eyes, the bitten cuticles, the visible weight of realizing your childhood had been systematically curated. Do you remember your 16th birthday? I asked. Priya blinked. Dad took me to Cirque du Soleil. You were supposed to come, but you had a migraine. I had reservations at Osteria Marini for 4:30 that afternoon, I said. Your favorite restaurant at 16, corner table requested 6 weeks in advance. When I came home at 3 to change clothes, Vernon told me you'd called to cancel, said you wanted father-daughter time. I found the confirmation in my deleted emails last Thursday. He'd canceled it at 2:45, 30 minutes after I'd confirmed I was leaving work early. The thing about pattern interrupts is that they work both ways. You can interrupt someone's perception of reality the way Vernon had for 3 decades. Or you can interrupt the interruption itself, restoration disguised as revelation. I'd spent 2 years learning to distinguish between medical urgency and manufactured crisis. Long QT syndrome had taught me that some electrical pathways misfire, send wrong signals, convince your body it's dying when it's just confused. Vernon had been my cardiac arrhythmia chaos that felt like catastrophe until you understood the mechanism. Priya's face went very still. What else? Your college graduation. You think I missed your ceremony because I was deposing a witness in Boston. I was in Providence, checked into the Renaissance 2 miles from Brown's campus. Vernon called at 6 a.m. and said you'd specifically requested I not attend that. Seeing me would make you too emotional. I sat in that hotel room 4 hours before I drove home. Jesus, Priya whispered. Thanksgiving 2019. Christmas 2020 and 2021. Your law school acceptance at Columbia, you went to Parsons for architecture instead, and Vernon told me it was because I'd been too controlling. I found his emails to your guidance counselor yesterday in Adrian Spencer's files. He'd been steering you away from law since junior year because, quote, her mother's professional shadow would be psychologically damaging. Priya sat down on the curb, just lowered herself to the concrete. I sat beside her, our shoulders not quite touching. The calendar alerts, Priya said slowly. I'd send you invitations to my graduate exhibition my firm's opening the Brooklyn Public Library Gala. You never responded. I thought you were punishing me for choosing architecture. I never received them, I said. He had access to my email filters. Every message from your address went to a folder labeled Archive Personal. I found 4 years of invitations on Monday. You sent 17 between 2019 and 2023. I saw 0. The wind picked up carrying traffic sounds from the interstate. He told me you had early onset dementia, Priya said. Last April, said you were getting confused, forgetting conversations, that I shouldn't be alarmed if you seemed distant. He was pre-framing your behavior in case you ever tried to tell me the truth. I thought about Vernon's guardianship petition, the emergency filing that listed neurological decline as grounds for removing my legal autonomy. He'd been building the narrative for years, laying groundwork the way he'd done with the Delaware Shell Company, the fabricated emails the detective he'd paid in 2002 to tell Walter Townsend I wanted no contact. How do we fix this? Priya asked, her voice cracking. How do I sort out which memories are real and which ones he engineered? Every conversation I remember, I'm second-guessing now. Every phone call that went to voicemail, every birthday card I thought you didn't send, I sent cards every year, I said quietly, until 2018 when you texted saying receiving them felt like obligation disguised as love. That text came from your number at 9:14 p.m. on March 3rd. You were in Milan for a design competition. Your location data shows you were at a client dinner until midnight local time. Vernon sent that message from your phone while you were 8 hours ahead and unreachable. Priya turned to look at me, and I saw something I recognized from the mirror, the specific vertigo of realizing solid ground had been quicksand all along. Do we have time, she asked, to rebuild this after 28 years of manufactured perception? I wanted to say yes, wanted to offer the optimism that had kept me married to Vernon through 3 decades of systematic isolation, the same hopeful delusion that Florence had clung to when she'd hidden Walter's 1987 letter rather than confronting truth. But I'd just spent 2 years learning the difference between optimism and honesty, between cardiac arrhythmia and genuine crisis, between wanting something desperately and having the neural pathways to make it real. Some synapses don't regrow, some daughterhoods don't either. And 20 feet away, Beckett's rental car pulled into the parking lot, and I realized both my children had come home on the same day I'd legally buried their father's last grasp at control. Beckett burned the chicken, and somehow that made the first dinner we'd shared in 6 years feel honest. He'd driven me to Atlanta from the courthouse parking lot, 3 hours of careful conversation that avoided the 28 years Vernon had spent engineering our estrangement. His apartment was modest second floor of a converted warehouse in Old Fourth Ward, the kind of space a 25-year-old private investigator chooses when he's decided simplicity matters more than square footage. The smoke detector went off while he was plating the charred breasts. He waved a dish towel at the ceiling sensor, swearing quietly, and I found myself smiling for the first time since the judge's gavel had come down. "I don't cook," he said, setting the plates on a second-hand table that wobbled slightly. "Obviously." "I noticed," I said. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the chicken dry but edible, the green beans overcooked in a way that felt endearing rather than incompetent. Through the window I could see the Atlanta skyline office towers lit against the November dusk. "I stopped answering Dad's calls in 2021, Beckett said finally. "October, 2 years before the hearing. Took me that long to realize I should have been making yours." I set down my fork. "What happened in October 2021? He called me 3 times in 1 week asking detailed questions about your schedule, your medical appointments, whether you'd seemed confused during our last conversation. I didn't think much of it until the 3rd call, when he asked if I'd be willing to provide a written statement about your declining cognitive function." Beckett's jaw tightened. "That was a month before you collapsed at the firm. He was building the guardianship case before you ever went to the hospital." The timeline clicked into place, Vernon recording the hospital corridor conversation in October 2021, drafting the guardianship petition in February 2021, 8 months of preparation before manufacturing the crisis that would justify stripping my legal autonomy. "You saw it before I did," I said quietly. "I'm a PI. I recognize surveillance when I hear it." He pushed food around his plate. "But I didn't call to warn you. I just went silent. Let him think I'd lost interest in the family drama. That's on me." I pulled Walter Townsend's letter from my purse, the one Virgil Harrington had included with the estate documentation. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Walter would have used for client correspondence when I was 23, and he was watching me from a distance he'd chosen out of respect for Florence's fear. "Can I read you something?" I asked. Beckett nodded. I unfolded the letter and began. "Dear Irene, I'm writing this in 2017, knowing I may never send it, hoping you'll receive it only after I'm gone and unable to complicate your life further. Maritime law rewards those who navigate by dead, reckoning when the stars disappear. You've spent 30 years sailing without instruments, and you've still found your way to harbor. That's not luck, that's precision. I watched you argue the Chesapeake salvage case in 2009. You didn't know I was their 3rd row left side. You disassembled their expert witness with 6 questions, each one building on the structural flaw you'd identified in their premise. That's how I knew you were mine, not the DNA, but the architecture of your thinking. Walter had written the letter when I was 23 and untested. I was reading it at 61 with a federal case number and a son who'd learned to forgive without performing it. Some inheritances arrive decades after the bequest, carrying compound interest on validation you'd stopped expecting. "He sounds exactly like you," Beckett said. "Or you sound like him. I never got to hear the difference." "Neither did I said. 2 weeks later, I sat in Celeste Ramsey's office in Charleston while she walked me through the civil complaint. The federal prosecutor had agreed to share evidence in exchange for coordination on asset recovery. Vernon's frozen Cayman accounts would be easier to claw back with parallel proceedings. "The misconduct clause you wrote in 2001 has a clawback provision for fraud," Celeste said, highlighting Section 14 of the partnership agreement I'd drafted 22 years earlier. "He loses 22 years of partnership equity, roughly $3.8 million minus liabilities." I stared at the language I'd written when Harper & Reed was expanding from 6 attorneys to 18, when I'd been thinking about structural integrity and fiduciary duty in the abstract about other people's husbands who might someday embezzle client funds or falsify billing records. "I drafted that clause thinking about other people's marriages," I said. "You built the cage 20 years before you needed it," Celeste said. "That's not irony, that's architecture." She filed the complaint that afternoon. Vernon's professional credentials were suspended pending the criminal investigation. The Delaware Shell Company was dissolved, the stolen funds tagged for recovery. He'd be stripped to whatever he could hide in offshore accounts the IRS hadn't found yet, and Conrad Dalton's forensic accountants were still digging. 3 weeks after the hearing, I walked into the T12 boardroom at Harper & Reed for the first time in 2 years. The mahogany table had the same water rings from my coffee cup 2 years preserved, like evidence the firm hadn't replaced me, just pretended I'd never sat here. Prescott Griffin stood at the head of the table, his face carefully neutral. "The vote was unanimous," he said. "We're asking you to resume managing partner effective immediately." 6 board members. 6 votes. Vernon's seat had been eliminated entirely. "I'll need Vernon's client files transferred by end of week," I said. "All of them." A junior partner I barely recognized cleared his throat. "We failed you. The firm failed you. I have no defense except that he was convincing and we were lazy." It was the most honest thing anyone at Harper & Reed had said to me in 3 years. I took my seat. Through the window, I could see Charleston Harbor container ships, stacked with cargo moving along routes plotted by instruments. I understood coordinates and currents laws of physics that didn't negotiate. That night, Beckett walked me to the rental car outside his Atlanta apartment. He didn't hug, didn't offer comfort, just looked at me with his father's blue eyes and my biological father's structural thinking. "I know," he said. "Now go do your job." That was forgiveness, not absolution, not reconciliation, just permission to stop apologizing and rebuild what I'd built before. Some things don't need to be repaired, just resumed. But Vernon's legal team wasn't surrendering quietly, and the client files I'd reclaimed revealed something neither the U.S. attorney nor I had anticipated. Vernon's client files revealed a pattern: 7 estates over 12 years, each one structured with identical offshore routing, each one involving a spouse with medical complexity. Vernon had leveraged for guardianship angles. The U.S. attorney added 2 counts of conspiracy. But that discovery could wait. Celine was packing for Nashville when I brought the letter of recommendation she didn't ask for and probably didn't deserve. Her Charleston apartment was half-empty cardboard boxes stacked against walls that still bore picture hooks from a life she'd lived before, testifying against the man who'd promised her a different ending. Through the window, I could see MUSC's hospital tower, the same building where Vernon had tried to access my medical records before I'd regained consciousness. "You came," Celine said, surprised enough that her professional composure slipped. I handed her the sealed envelope. "Letter of recommendation for the senior partners in Nashville." She stared at the envelope like it might detonate. "You have every reason to let me burn. Why aren't you—" "Because Vernon curated your memories too," I said. "He told you I was cold, neglectful, that our marriage was a professional arrangement I'd stopped honoring years ago. The difference is, you testified anyway." Celine set the envelope on a half-packed box, didn't open it. "The letter won't change what I did." "No," I agreed, "but it might change what you do next." We stood in that apartment for another 5 minutes, 2 women who'd shared the same man's lies from different angles, who'd both chosen to stand up when sitting down would have been easier and considerably more lucrative. She didn't thank me. I didn't expect her to. Some generosity exists purely to prove you're not the person someone tried to make you. I met her 2 weeks later at a cafe near the hospital, far enough from downtown Charleston that neither of us would run into colleagues. She'd opened the letter. "It's too generous," Celine said. "It's accurate," I said. "You're a betrayed cardiologist who made personal errors in judgment that don't affect your clinical competence. Nashville is getting exactly what I wrote." She looked at me across coffee neither of us was drinking. "I don't know how to carry this, your mercy. It feels heavier than your anger would have." "Then put it down," I said. "I didn't write that letter for you to carry. I wrote it because he spent 32 years making me smaller, meaner, colder than I actually am. Proving him wrong matters more than punishing you." Celine left for Tennessee the next morning. I never saw her again. Florence Hayes died in 2019 before she could see me make managing partner, before Vernon could erase her from my memory the way he'd erased calendar invitations and birthday cards and Walter Townsend's 1987 attempt at contact. This foundation was the one name he couldn't curate away the woman who'd raised me, despite her fear, who'd taught me that maritime law rewards those who navigate when the stars disappear. The Charleston School of Law auditorium seated 200. Every chair was filled. Celeste stood near the back, her forensic accountant's precision applied to catering logistics and audio-visual setup. Beckett and Priya flanked the podium like parentheses around a sentence. We were all still learning to parse my son in a navy suit that almost disguised his PI's preference for jeans, my daughter, in architect sharp black, that made her look older than 29. I'd invited Raymond Bell personally, found his home address through Harper & Reed's facilities records, knocked on his door in North Charleston on a Tuesday evening, and asked him to attend. He'd seemed baffled by the invitation. Now he sat in the third row wearing a tie that looked borrowed, his weathered hands folded in his lap like he was attending church instead of a legal foundation launch. I opened with remarks I'd written and rewritten 17 times. This foundation honors Florence Hayes, who taught me that the law is architecture. You build structures that hold weight you can't predict. The Florence Hayes Foundation will support mid-career women displaced by professional exploitation, providing legal resources and career transition funding. Because some of us navigate by dead reckoning when the stars disappear, and some of us need a harbor. Applause. Polite measured the kind you hear at institutional events, where generosity meets procedure. But before the Charleston legal establishment and the assembled dignitaries and the reporters covering the $65 million estate's first distribution, I stepped off the podium and walked to the third row. Raymond Bell looked up startled as I extended my hand. "Mr. Bell," I said loud enough that the microphone caught it. "2 years ago, you found deleted emails in a recycling bin at Harper & Reed. You could have emptied that bin like you'd done every night for 8 years. Instead, you brought those emails to our chief operating officer. I need to thank you for that choice." He stood awkwardly, shook my hand with the careful grip of someone who'd spent decades cleaning other people's offices and learning not to leave marks. "Ma'am, it was just my job. The bin shouldn't have had those files." "No, Mr. Bell," I said. "It was your choice. You saw something wrong and you chose to tell someone. That choice is why we're standing here. That choice is why Vernon Whitfield is answering to a federal prosecutor instead of managing my estate from a guardianship he manufactured." The auditorium had gone very quiet. Raymond Bell's eyes were damp. "I just thought it looked important. Those emails, the dates didn't match the recycling schedule." "They were important," I said. "You saw that when nobody else was looking. Thank you." I returned to the podium. Celeste handled the Q&A about foundation structure and application procedures. Beckett and Priya stood beside me during the reception, not quite touching, but present the physics of a family learning to occupy the same space without Vernon's gravitational distortion. Raymond Bell left early, declining the catered reception, but he stopped at the door and looked back. I caught his eye across the auditorium. He nodded once, then disappeared into the December evening. I'd spent 2 years learning that nothing is just anything. His choice to report deleted emails instead of emptying the bin quietly was the difference between Vernon's freedom and this microphone, between guardianship and this foundation, between the narrative Vernon had been building and the one I was standing in now. Some people choose integrity when no one's watching. Those are the ones worth remembering. But Vernon's sentencing hearing was scheduled for January, and the federal prosecutor had asked me to deliver a victim impact statement. One final confrontation with the 32-year equation I'd been solving since the night he'd walked into our anniversary gala with another woman's hand on his arm. The burner number lit my desk phone 3 days after the foundation launch, and I knew Vernon's composure had finally dissolved into the math that didn't add up. I'd returned to the managing partner's office at Harper & Reed, the T12 corner suite overlooking Charleston Harbor, where I'd spent 15 years before Vernon's guardianship petition had tried to strip my legal autonomy. The mahogany desk was the same. The view of container ships sliding toward the Atlantic was unchanged. But the woman sitting here had done the arithmetic Vernon never expected me to finish. I let the phone ring twice before I answered. "Why, Florence Hayes." Vernon's voice had lost its administrative precision. No greeting, no preamble, just the question that had been eating at him since he'd seen the foundation announcement in the Charleston Legal Digest. "You inherited $65 million from your biological father. Walter Townsend built a maritime empire. and you named the foundation after a dead law professor. Florence Hayes was my mentor, I said. She taught me maritime law when I was 24, died when I was 27, before she could see me make partner. She left $11,000 in savings and a legacy worth considerably more than Walter's estate. That's absurd, Vernon said, and I heard the crack in his voice, the same fracture I'd heard in the hospital corridor recording when he'd told someone I'd served my purpose. You threw away the Townsend name for what? Sentimentality? For principle, I said. Florence taught me that standing up costs everything and is worth every penny. You spent 32 years making the cost feel impossible, Vernon. She taught me to pay it anyway. You're being too emotional, he said. And there it was, the phrase he'd deployed for 3 decades whenever I'd challenged. His logic questioned his decisions, pointed out the structural flaws in his reasoning. No, I said, and the clarity felt like solving an equation I'd been working since 1991. I finally understand what that phrase actually meant. You only called me too emotional when you realized I was smarter than you and needed me to doubt myself. Every partnership vote where I identified the flaw in your strategy. Every client meeting where my analysis was sharper than yours. Every time the math solved against you and you needed me to stop calculating. Silence on the line. Not the comfortable silence of 32 years of marriage, but the empty space where Vernon's counter-argument should have been and wasn't. The guardianship petition listed emotional dysregulation 14 times. I continued. Your expert witness, the one who shares a 15-year LLC with you, testified I exhibited inappropriate emotional responses to routine professional stressors. But Celeste's digital forensics found your notes from 2019. You wrote, IW identified the Kensington merger liability exposure I'd missed. Made me look incompetent in front of Prescott. Need to reframe her precision as instability. 32 years of too emotional condensed into one burner call. Vernon's voice had the same administrative flatness as the hospital recording discussing my disposal, like quarterly projections, except now the math had solved against him, and he was calling from a burner line because his legal team had advised against direct contact. You curated everyone's perception of me, I said. Beckett, Priya, the Harper, and Reed board, even Celine, but you couldn't curate the evidence. Conrad found the shell company. Prescott kept your extortion emails. Raymond Bell found the deleted files. And I kept calculating even when you told me I was too emotional to trust my own arithmetic. The equation is solved, Vernon, I said. You have nothing left I need to hear. I disconnected before he could respond. The burner number called back twice. I didn't answer. Priya arrived on the last working day before Christmas carrying coffee from the place on Broad Street that still made it the way I'd taught her to order when she was 16, before Vernon had started deleting my calendar invitations and manufacturing reasons for us to stay apart. She stood in the doorway of my office looking at the bare walls. You haven't redecorated. Not yet, I said. I'm deciding what goes up. She walked to the window, looked out at the harbor where container ships were loading cargo, bound for ports I'd studied in Florence Hayes' maritime law seminar 34 years ago. You could hang Dad's diplomas, Grandfather Walter's maritime credentials, the Townsend family history. I agreed. Priya turned from the window. Why Florence Hayes? For the foundation. Name for... She gestured at the photograph I'd set on my desk, still in its frame, not yet mounted. You inherited Walter Townsend's entire estate, $65 million, his legacy. I'm the rightful heir to both legacies, I said. Walter gave me the estate and the intellect, the structural thinking, the capacity to navigate when the instruments fail. Florence gave me the spine to use them. She taught me that standing up costs everything and buys the only thing mathematics can't price. I lifted Florence's photograph from my desk, a candid shot from 1987, her office at the Charleston School of Law, late afternoon light, through Venetian blinds creating the same pattern I could see on my carpet now. She was 53 in the photo, the same age I'd been when Vernon had recorded that hospital corridor conversation about my usefulness expiring. You look exactly like her, Priya said quietly. I know, I said. I mounted the photograph on the central pillar, the space where managing partners traditionally hung their most significant credential. Not my Yale law degree, not Walter Townsend's Maritime Empire documentation, not the Harper & Reed founding partner certificate. Florence Hayes, who died with $11,000 in savings and a spine made of rebar, who taught me that precision without courage is just arithmetic, who told me in 1989 that the women who last in law are the ones who refuse to make themselves smaller to fit someone else's comfort. Container ships slid out of Charleston Harbor carrying cargo worth less than what Vernon had stolen and more than what Florence had left me in her will. She'd bequeathed me a copy of her annotated maritime law casebook with one sentence on the inside cover: "The stars will disappear, navigate anyway." I choose this legacy. I told Priya, looking at Florence's photograph catching the December light the same way her office had 34 years ago. Walter gave me the freedom. Florence gave me the reason to use it. Some legacies you inherit through DNA and estate distributions, and $65 million wire transfers. Others you choose because they taught you that standing up costs everything and buys the only thing mathematics can't price: the capacity to look at yourself in December light and recognize the architecture of who you decided to become. And to you listening to my story, remember this. For 32 years, I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe in the marriage I thought I had. I let Vernon call me too emotional until I doubted my own intelligence. I let him curate my relationships with my children until I was isolated. Don't make my mistake. Trust yourself. When someone consistently makes you doubt your perception, that's not love, that's control. The lesson I learned is that revenge isn't about destroying someone who hurt you. Real justice is standing up, reclaiming what was stolen, and building something better. So many revenge cheating stories end with someone becoming as toxic as their betrayer. I refused to let Vernon's manipulation turn me into someone I didn't recognize. I believe God put me through this for a reason, to show that even after 32 years of deception, you can choose integrity over bitterness. The Florence Hayes Foundation honors the woman who taught me that standing up costs everything and is worth it. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know experienced this kind of manipulation? Please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your life. And if you want to hear more revenge cheating stories about standing up and rebuilding, please subscribe to Her Vengeance. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection, but the message that you can rebuild after betrayal is real.